Welcome back, listeners, even viewers, to the Arcade Attack podcast. We've got a real, true, amazing guest on today's show. Someone I've always wanted to interview actually for many, many years. A true Amiga legend. He created Worms, one of my favorite games on the Amiga. So Andy Davidson, thank you so much for your time today.
My pleasure. So it's good to do this, finally.
Yeah, thank you. Now, obviously, Andy, your story is, for me, quite inspirational. I'm not just trying to say that to make you feel good or whatever, but I just think it's quite really interesting that at such an early age, you actually made Worms, kind of against the odds. I mean, from your bedroom, I believe. So I can't wait to get into that story. But before we do that, can you remember like the first ever time you thought? Obviously, a massive gamer growing up, I'm sure. But do you remember the first time you thought inspired that you thought you could actually work in the industry and make your own games? And do you remember the first ever game you dabbled in, for example, Andy?
Well, so like you said, I'd always been into video games. Like I grew up very thankful to grow up in sort of the golden age of like the arcades. And I had everything from Nintendo Game & Watches to the Atari VCS. But I can remember when I was 9, my form teacher had a VIC-20 like set up in the classroom. He was a bit ahead of his time because this is sort of before you had all the main push for computers in classrooms. But he had one already, and as soon as I messed around with that, it totally captured my imagination. It seemed like to be able to type things and make things happen on a television screen. It seemed like pure magic. And so I can remember like I was very young and didn't really know much about what I was doing, but I can remember trying to recreate Scramble from the arcade. And all I could get it to do was actually just draw the screen. I had no idea how to make things move and shoot and like everything. But at 9 years old, I had the seed that I wanted to create something. And I think from then onwards, it had always been my dream to get a game published. I didn't know whether I'd be able to do it or not, but that was always my dream. And my parents were really supportive. The best thing I'd ever been given was the Amiga 500. My mum told me that when the first time I saw an Amiga in the computer shop, she said my face lit up like nothing she'd ever seen before. And she went back to Dad and said, me and you are going to have to work extra shifts. We have to get him an Amiga. You know, she goes, so I've never seen him so excited about something. And so I really appreciate that my parents did that. And that set me on the road, basically on the road to everything that happened.
Oh, bless you. And I got an Amiga 600 as well, quite early on in my life, and it changed my life actually. But what were the first games you got in the Amiga? Do you remember? Was
Marble Madness, which I've been a huge fan of, and Defender of the Crown. I can remember the first time I saw screenshots of Defender of the Crown. That was from the future. That was just the graphics and everything. So yeah, this would be 1987. So like when the 500 first came out. And it came unbundled with some other games like Data Storm, which I thought was superb. Really, really good Defender variant, possibly better than the original. So
you got the Amiga proper early, didn't you, Andy? Then
yeah.
I got it in the early 90s, but you got the first wave of games, and incredible. Andy, I'd love to hear it in as much detail as you're happy to share, because I find the Worm story quite interesting, and it's not a usual way of making a video game. So I'd love to know from the right beginning, when it was not even Worms, what was the sort of initial ideas? How did you come about it? I think it was you're playing a game called Artillery, maybe, and I think there was an 8-bit Casio calculator involved. I just want to hear everything. If that's all right.
Yeah, no, it is a bit of an unusual story. It's like it all started from the very first thing was because I worked really hard for my GCSEs, and I got my results, and I looked at the paper. I can remember thinking that I got my good grades and everything, but there's a sense of anticlimax that, well, I know what I want to do, and this isn't really helping me. It's not putting me on the path. There was no courses back then in video game design. So it's not like I could go to university and study video games. It was unheard of back then. So I was a bit lost, basically. I didn't know what I was doing. And I stayed on to do my A-levels. And after working so hard for GCSEs, I just couldn't take to A-levels at all. It was a lot more work. It was a lot of essays and things like this. And I'd lost this. I just didn't know what I was doing. So in the middle of A level maths, which was my mate and me had got the Casio calculators. They were clamshell, like the DS, and they had a really, really primitive programming language on them. And he sort of challenged me, said, do you think you'd be able to make a game on this? And I said, well, I'm going to give it a damn good try. It's better than doing A-level maths. Yeah. And so then I'd always liked, going back to the days of the Spectrum, I'd always liked artillery games, which I think most of your viewers and listeners would be familiar with, where you've just usually have a tank on each side of the screen. You choose your angle, your velocity. Sometimes they have wind to take into account, and the aim is to hit the other tank. And they're quite simple. So I thought, well, let's try and see if I can get one of those on a Casio calculator, because it's a graph plotting one. And I managed it. And wow. But the thing which really interested me was the landscape generators. It had a random landscape generator, which I put into it. And that's the thing that I was really interested in that. So I thought, well, there's only so much. It was a very simple artillery game, like literally what I just described. It was nothing like Worms. But the seed had been planted that I wanted to play around with landscape generators more. And so the obvious thing, I just got my Amiga 500. Wow. The obvious thing was to then port the game, as it were, to the Amiga, even though it's a completely different language. And so on the Amiga using Amos, I knocked it up a game. It was actually called Artillery. And then I was quite chuffed with that. But as I think most people are familiar with, the games, they're really addictive games, but they get quite repetitive because there's not much. I decided there wasn't enough movement in the game. So one of the first things I did was make the tanks move around, which obviously, and then suddenly I realized the strategy in the game was opening up a lot more then, because if you're in a bad position, obviously you can't pull off much shots. But then if you move into a better, like say up to the top of a hill, you're suddenly in a much better position. And instantly the simple artillery game was beginning to get a bit more depth. So then I added water across the bottom for instant kills. So, if your tank's knocked down, and if you stay near the water and you get a direct hit, then you were drowned and it was game over. And that introduced another tactic to it. And so it sort of became a challenge to myself, like how deep can I make an artillery game? And I did it. Actually, the next thing I did was actually I'd written a ripper called Jack, because I loved the demo scene with the Amiga demos with the mod files, and I wanted to get the music out of the demos. So I wrote a ripper because on the Amiga, when you reset the computer with your Control Amiga, it didn't clear the memory. So you could go through memory and have a look at what was in there, have a rummage, and kind of see what you could pull out. So I wrote a ripper just mainly to get music out of demos, so I could listen to them outside. But then I also realized you could view the memory as graphics as well. So my mate, after I wrote this program, and my mate was really quite impressed with it. And he said, well, can you get the graphics out of Lemmings? Yeah. And I went, well, I'll give it a damn good dose. This was just when Lemmings had come out, and I was really impressed with the animation, the little graphics in the game. And so I thought I'd give it a go. And lo and behold, all the graphics of Lemmings came up in my program. And I couldn't believe this and everything. So I saved out the Lemmings, and then as a surprise, I swapped out the tanks for little Lemmings to put them in the game as a surprise, to say, look what we've done. And it was only meant to be for a laugh. But as soon as I did it and seeing people's reaction to it, it was obvious that having actual characters was a lot more appealing than tanks. Yeah. And I'd already put movement into the artillery game. But just having characters meant I realized I could get humor into the game. I could get a lot more movement and a lot more actions, and I thought I could do a lot with this, and that's when things really began to snowball from there.
That's amazing. Do you know? We've had Mike Daly on the show in the past. Actually, I don't know if you ever spoke to him about this or
no. I was at the Zap Live 2024, but I missed his talk. So because I was been busy talking about worms and everything, so I missed it. But no, I'd always I believe he was the artist, wasn't he?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so he was the artist, and I would like to shake him by the hand because I thought the amount of character he got into those little animations, I was so impressed by. And when I decided to really go, or actually, I'm getting ahead of the story here, so I shall go back to you, sort of for where you lead it next.
Well, yeah, I guess the game was taking shape, and it was. I assume it's more for you and your friends. It was just sort of evolving.
Yeah.
And I guess, did you see the opportunity for getting it out there? Well, I think there was like a competition, Blitz Basic from Amiga Format, which was a great magazine back in the day, actually, to be fair. But did that sort of spark something inside you going, hang on a minute, is this like my next sort of step, trying to get it out there a little bit?
Yeah, because it's Amiga Format. That's my if SAP 64 is my favourite Commodore 64 magazine, then Amiga Format was my favourite Amiga magazine.
Right, yeah.
So I got it religiously each month, read it cover to cover. And one of the issues came with Blitz Basic 2. Like on the cover disc, full working version, probably the best thing any magazine has given away, because I was used to getting all the the demos of games and things like that, but to give you a programming language on a cover disc to create your own stuff, that's a pretty damn good idea. And so, as it was a version of BASIC, so this version of the game was running in Amos, which is a version of BASIC as well. But I was coming up to limits in what I could do with it. So with Blitz Basic, the big hype was the promise that you could make a commercial game with it, and they had Skid Marks, which is one of the racing game, which is a damn good game.
That's a good game.
And it looked like it lived up to the hype of being able to do this. So with this cover disc, and it was a full working version of it, I set to work on converting it from Amos to Blitz Basic 2. And it became clear very early on that it was a lot faster. There was things like structures from C, which were really useful for making games. And I thought, right, I'm going to, and then in the same issue, it mentioned the competition.
Incredible.
Which was, who can make the best game in Blitz Basic 2. And I don't know I can't remember whether it said anything about the game being published or not. But I thought I was onto something, because the earlier version of the game got banned from school. Yes, because I'd taken over a corner of the art room, making my little game, and the form tutor, the teacher banned it because people were skipping lessons to come up and play it.
Oh wow!
And in my head, anything that's banned is good.
Like,
whether it's Relaxed by Frankie Goes to Hollywood or God Save the Queen by the Sex Pistols, if something's getting banned, you've at least got something, something that stands out.
Yeah. And
so I thought this competition would be a good way of getting the game noticed. So I can't remember whether there was any mention of the game being published, but I thought it'd be a good way of getting it noticed. So I started I worked round the clock. Like I'd quit my A-levels at this point, and I was working part-time in a computer shop, which is an Amiga shop, which was really, which was lucky and very handy, because I'd be staying up all night programming the game, and then the next day, customers would be playtesting it in the shop. So it was quite a good little setup. And I think it wasn't too long till the deadline. I think it was only a few months until the deadline. But because it was going from one basic to another, it was doable. Yeah. And that's when I decided on having worms as the protagonists. Yeah. Because I also thought, because a worm is quite simple, I thought of Lemmings. I thought you've got to have something simple, easy to animate at that size. I needed small characters like Lemmings if I was going to have 16 of them on the screen. So I decided on worms. I thought they're nice, simple shape. I thought I'd be able to get a lot of character and humour. I instantly thought about like a worm going into the ground and its tail going like that. Little things like that. And so I decided on the name Total Wormage.
It's a good name. It's a good name.
Thank you. I was really chuffed with that. It's quite Worms is obviously the simpler and it works. The name Worms, but I was quite partial to Total Wormage, and the logo was obviously a parody of the arcade game Total Carnage.
Another great game, to be honest.
Yeah.
Andy,
yeah.
sorry. Yeah.
Back to you.
When you decided to quit A levels and make this game, that was a big risk. was your parent, was your family a bit like, what are you doing?
Well, no, my parents, I can't thank them enough for not only for getting me the Amiga to let me do all this, but they always trust my judgment. I knew, because they weren't aware of the video game industry, and they weren't aware that you could make a living from it. So I knew they were worried about what I was doing, but I explained to them that I can always go to university later, that I didn't have to go now, and this is what I'm really passionate about. And they said, well, if this is what you want to do, we will support you. And my form tutor, though, he was not as supportive, because I went to a grammar school, so it was very much, it was like an academic production line. It was, you will do this, you will do that, you will get these results, you will go there, you will get this job. They, apart from my art teacher, who was really supportive, they didn't really take much interest back then in what you wanted to do. It was just, you will do this. And so I just went, I'm not going to do this. I want to try and get my game published. And my form tutor, he just turned to me and went, Andy, you're good. You're not that good. And I was quite taken aback by that, because, he's my form tutor. He's meant to be,
supportive.
Meant to be supportive and trying to, I thought, they'd be trying to sort of find what their students are good at, what they want to do with their lives and everything. But he was pretty black and white. You're not that good. And but to me, that just drove me on to want to prove him wrong, basically. So during all those late nights staying up programming Total Wormage, at the back of my head was, I'm going to prove you wrong, and it really drove me on. So in a weird way, and I had the other art teacher who was really supportive. And I suppose they could have been doing good cop, bad cop. I don't know.
Yeah, possibly.
It could have been deeply psychological, because I had one teacher basically saying go for it, and the other one saying you're no good. So after a few months, Total Wormage was all up and running in Blitz Basic 2. And again, that's another thing. I think I'm very fortunate that language came out, because it's a beautiful language for making games, because it's other languages are just made to make anything in particular, but Blitz Basic 2 was really optimized for making games on the Amiga, and you could do lots of tricks with it. And I was really pleased with the result. And I thought, well, let's hope it gets noticed in the competition.
We'll talk about it in a second. But before I forget, have you ever seen your form tutor since? Have you ever bumped into him? Or?
I did. So after a few years after Worms came out, I went back mainly to see the one who was supportive. But the teacher came out and greeted me was the one who was you're no good. And he put his hand out to shake my hand. So I shook his hand, and he went, Andy, we always knew you were going to make it. And I just thought, no, you didn't. But I was polite and just nodding, thank you. But it's really, it's interesting. And I think things, I hope anyway, I think things are much more different these days. You've got courses in video games. The industry's taken a lot more seriously. And I think if there's any kids at school growing up who are into video games, I hope they get a lot more support and be able to. And nowadays, I had to go a bit to get sort of against the grain to sort of do what I did, but I hope it's better now.
Just to get it completely straight, Andy. So you drew the art as well for Worms. You programmed it. It's just a one-man team. It was just you doing everything. Really, that's a lot of. Me,
my Amiga, Deluxe Paint. Megala Sound was the sampler I used to do all the voices and everything. The Deluxe Paint, obviously, superb paint package. And my mates were playtesting it. Although one of my friends, he did some of the sound effects, like the very miserable worms, like the worms that go, oh dear, before they kill themselves. That was my mate. I did the Angry Worms, and my mate he did the voice of the sheep as well.
Oh, nice.
The sheep came later though. That was one of the later editions.
So just to be Total Wormage, was it very close to what Worms eventually became, the first game, or was there a few little subtle differences?
It was about, I'd say the game in terms of what Worms was when it came out, it was about 80% done.
Right. Cool.
It was, and I was really pleased with it because similar to when the game was banned at school. Another of the things that sort of sticks in my head was when I was playtesting it in the shop. One of the kids would be playing it, and his dad came in to pick him up and give him these. They were coming in after school and everything to play the game, and his dad would come in to pick him up to take him home, but instead his dad sat down and started playing the game with him, and they were there for a good 2 hours just playing it together, and that was a lovely thing to see, because I wanted to try and create a game that would appeal even people. I wanted to try and create a game that even if people didn't like computer games or didn't think computer games were cool, that they could play it and enjoy it. And so to see a kid who was heavily into the games play it, and then his dad who wasn't, and the whole cross-generational thing as well was really cool to see. And so going into the competition, I wouldn't say I thought I was going to win it, but I thought I've got something here and it's different, and that it would get noticed. So I sent off my disc to Amiga formats.
All right, yeah.
And crossed my fingers.
So the competition wasn't a live event, was it? Was it like just send it in by the post?
Just send it in. I think Amiga Format looked at them, and I think Acid Software, who made Blitz and Skid Marks, they looked at them as well. But I'm not that clear exactly what happened after I sent my discs in, because I never heard anything.
Yeah, because again, this is just internet talk, but apparently your submission didn't really do much. People didn't hear back.
No, like I heard nothing. And the only thing I know about the competition at all was like months later in the magazine, like quite near the back, they had a little section about it, and it listed the winner and described the winner, and that was about it. Just a tiny little mention, and I never saw any of the games on Amiga Formats cover discs or anything. So the whole thing sort of sunk without trace. Now I was quite gutted because they described the game that won, and the game that won was a clone of Atari's Circus, which is a game. I don't know if you're familiar with it or your viewers and listeners are familiar. It's basically you have two clowns on a seesaw, and one drops on one side of the seesaw, which fires the other one up to pop balloons. And then when you've popped all the balloons, the game's over. So it's sort of like an abstract clown-infested version of Breakout, but not as it. Yeah. And it's not that I'm not a fan of clowns in general. Go and see it. But it's a very simple game, and there's not much depth to it. And I can remember being quite gutted at the time that even if it had come second, third, or just had a mention of my game, I'd have been happier. But there was just no mention of it at all. But I didn't want to give up or anything. But that was quite gutting, because the other thing is when you're making a game, you're so close to something. It is very hard to imagine what someone new to it will think, someone outside, because you're living and breathing it. And even the playtesters are living and breathing it every day. So at the back of my mind was, well, is this any good? Because you are so close to something, I can't imagine what someone new to it would think. But I ploughed on anyway while working out what to do, because I was still having all these ideas about new weapons and new things to put into it. But that, as I say, very close. I was very close to giving up at that point.
Can you imagine, Andy? Obviously, you would have heard of Team17 before. I was a big fan back in the day. I used to love their games, like even Body Blows. I've got a little bit of guilty pleasure of that game, and Alien Breed, and I think Super Frog, and some real classics actually. And I assume you would have heard of Team17 before as well. And
yeah, well, no,
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, go on.
I was just wondering how do they approach you, and when you think to yourself, wow, I already know this company, and how on earth did that happen? And maybe
Well,
your
it's
thoughts, your
like
initial thoughts. Yeah.
while I was making the game, like continuing on after the competition, um, because I was working in this computer shop, they got a trade magazine. I can't remember what it was called now, actually. But they got a trade newspaper basically every week with all the latest releases and
Yeah.
like news and things like that. And part of it was every September they held a trade show in London, the European Computer Trade Show, and so the weekly paper came in, and in it was like tickets to the trade show,
Nice.
because obviously this was a trade only newspaper, so you could get into a trade only show. And so I thought, sod it. If no one's going to look at my game, I'll make people
Yeah.
look at my game. And this was going to be my last shot, basically. So, and this was not long to go to the show. So I just, hey, it was on a Saturday. So I hastily printed out a sign saying sorry, due to unforeseen circumstances, the shop, because I was the person managing the shop. So I just put this notice on the door and just shut the shop for a day, and got on a train, went up to London with like 2 slightly scruffy looking discs with Total Wormage on,
Nice.
and got into the show okay. And Team17 was top of my list of the companies I wanted to go to, because I saw Total Wormage as it was a very Amiga game. Like without the Amiga, I couldn't have done all this. And everything from the hardware scrolling to the parallax to the sprites, it was I saw it as a very Amiga-y game. And I wanted to go to a company that was all about the Amiga. And so back then, Team17 were sort of the Amiga's champions, and their games were. I always liked the fact their games ran at full frame rate, and that you had excellent artists and musicians, people from the demo scene involved. And so I walked up to Team17's stand, and Martin Brown was there, and I was clutching my 2 discs, was so nervous. And I go like, do you still look at games? And he went, yeah, sure. And he took me over to an Amiga on the side, and he goes, right, yes, I load it up. And as it was loading, I went, you're not going to like this. It's a bit weird. You're probably, it's a bit strange. And I gave him a quick demo of it, and he just instantly went, do you want it published?
Nice.
Which I couldn't believe this. I thought it was a wind up, but I said, well, yes. And he goes, come up to, they were based in Wakefield at that point. And he goes, come up to the offices next week and we'll sort everything out. And I was completely blown away. So I was not expecting this at all, because as I say, you never know what someone new to the game is going to think of it. He could quite easily have turned around and go, no, sorry, not interested. It could have quite easily gone that way. But he liked, he saw something he liked. And I went back to Bournemouth so happy. But still at the back of my mind is this a wind up? Yeah. But the week went past, and I went up to Wakefield, went to their offices, and as I went in there, because I'd left the disc with them, and so they could, because I also wanted them to get a good idea of what the game was like, because it's not the easiest game to demo, because it's there's lots of different strategies involved in it and things like that. And then as I went into their offices, and I saw Total Wormage on basically every Amiga screen in the office, and I was so proud at that point, because it's like here I am, this close to achieving my dream, and people I respect and whose games I played are busy now playing my game. It was amazing. I can't really put into words what that was like.
I love that story. That's so great, isn't it? Incredible. So Did you have to move to Wakefield? Did you have to work in the office? Was it kind of taken off your hands after that? What was
No,
the
no,
next process?
they were really good. It's like I do just because I wanted to keep my friends who are busy playtesting. I wanted to keep them involved because they'd grown up from it from when it was a simple artillery game now to total wormage. And Team 17 were really good. They let me sort of stay in Bournemouth for a bit, and then I'd go up and stay in Wakefield for a bit, and they soon moved to Ossett. So I'd basically just go between one and the other, and when it was quite an unusual way to develop the game. But they basically during that time it was decided that basically they wanted to put the game on as many platforms as possible, not just the Amiga. So it was decided that I'd finish the Amiga one, and then they'd spend a year doing the conversions to the PlayStation, PC, and everything else. And I was given just basically complete freedom to do what I wanted, and I'd go down to Bournemouth for a bit, go up to Wakefield, or it was where it was, with the latest version of the game, and that's when Sheep went into it, for example. So Sheep went in quite late, and I got into a bit of trouble because I was adding stuff to it, but the exploding sheep just had to go in the game.
Yeah,
it's one of the things I was most happy with.
Oh, Andy, that's so fun. What? So, how long was it from meeting Martin Brown to getting your game actually on the shelves? What was the kind of timeline?
It's about a year. So, because I think the ECTS was in September '94, and then Worms came out in I think it was November '95.
For me personally, it was kind of for me Amiga's. For me, it was one of the last games I properly played on the Amiga before I sort of transitioned to the PlayStation and PC. But it was such a great sort of final game for me on the Amiga.
I'm pleased you felt that because it was because Commodore obviously they'd gone bankrupt like in '94. So Worms was actually a post bankruptcy game for them, and Commodore UK managed to keep going a bit longer. But that was one of the most gutting things when Commodore went bankrupt, and it's for us. It seemed to come from out of the blue. But obviously there's a lot of trouble in Commodore for many years, and mismanagement and things like that. But I'm happy that Worms still found its audience on the Amiga despite all that. And it did quite well on the Amiga, and it's nice it's still seen as an Amiga game as well, because as I say, I think one of the slogans for the Amiga in the early days was the computer for the creative mind, and I very much agree with that. It's like there was just something about the Amiga that just oozed creativity, and that it just encouraged you, and bundling it with things like deluxe paint and stuff was a stroke of genius as well, because it got you from playing games to doing artwork or whatever else you wanted to do with it, and it was a wonderful system for that. So I'm pleased. It was. And then I think it's nice. It's seen as one of the swan songs for the Amiga, is it?
Yeah, that's how I would describe it personally as well. Do you still remember the first time you saw it in the video game stores?
It's in our local game in Bournemouth, and they had cardboard cutouts of the Worms. I've got one of them actually.
Oh dear.
Yeah, I've got one of them still. And they've it was that had always been from those early days at 9 years old playing around with the VIC-20. It had always been my dream to get a game published and see it on the shelf. So it wouldn't matter how successful the game had been, just to have seen it on the shelf, I'd achieved my dream, and my parents were so proud. It was my dad who went and got the cardboard worm. So I just got this picture in my head of my dad bringing a cardboard worm home in the car, and so that they were over the moon, and I was as well.
I mean, absolutely incredible. What dedication as well, because you could have given up before. It wasn't like a clear pathway. You had ups and downs, so I've got a lot of respect for you, Andy, and I mean that. I've got to ask about the backgrounds for Worms, because I don't know how many backgrounds the first Worms had and then the director's cut, but I've got maybe 65,000. But I don't quite understand how they're made. Can you explain how they were randomly generated?
Yeah, because as I say, the random landscape generation, that was get that from the calculator to the Amiga. That was always the thing that really interested me, because with the game, I wanted to create a game that, because it originally wasn't designed to get published, it was literally so we could avoid doing schoolwork. So we obviously wanted a game that wasn't as boring as schoolwork. So I wanted to try and create a game that wouldn't become repetitive, where every game was different. And obviously the most crucial thing in an artillery game is the actual landscape you're fighting on. So with Total Wormage, it originally had 65,000. Well, actually, I had less than 65,000, because I found out by sheer chance that it repeated levels.
Right.
Yeah, by pure chance, it repeated levels. I thought so originally it didn't have 65,000, but when I found it repeated them, I modified it, tweaked it, and got it up to 65,000. And then later, there's a thing called a CRC checksum, which you can feed it a string and then it spits out a unique number. So that's why in Worms you can type a landscape number, or you can type a name, and it will generate you a level based on that. And that's when we got the levels up to 4 billion. And I thought, once I got to 4 billion, I thought that'll do. I think that, yeah. But in terms of how it generates the landscape's actually a very distorted sine wave. So if you think about it, a sine wave is just like that, which is basically what an artillery game is, basically a sine wave. So when I was doing it on the calculator, I was generating that and then modifying it. And then what it does is, as it's drawing the sine wave, it changes its amplitude and also changes the direction it's going in. Because also what I thought was very important in Worms is the fact you've got overhangs and things like that. Because if you're being attacked from above, you want to hide under something. And in basically all the artillery games I'd seen, it's basically just a level sort of like that. But with Worms, you get levels that sort of go round and under and things like that. So you've got ledges to hide under and things like that. But yeah, it's basically a very distorted sine wave. That's all it is.
It's clever, but wow.
And then it's using a seed to generate it. And the seed is why you've got 4 billion versions of them.
Wow. So, and you've got to ask then, Worms came out and it was an instant success, an instant hit on the Amiga. Then it was ported to basically every system under the sun.
Yeah,
it's ridiculous. I was in the previous podcast for Worms. Everything. It just didn't quite make the Virtual Boy, apparently. I was reading.
No, not many things make the Virtual Boy. But,
no.
That was an interesting system, but I can see why it wasn't a success.
But were you not working on the ports at all then? That wasn't really your thing then?
No, I wrote basically a Bible of Worms, because the artillery game started in 1990, and so by the time Team17 saw it, the whole game from the very beginning was 4 years old. So there'd been a lot of refining and a lot of balance tweaks and things like this. So basically, I broke everything down into numbers. What happens when that happens, this happens at that speed, at that angle, it does that much damage. This is that velocity. And so the Bible of Worms for all the different weapons and all the different conditions was handed out to the people doing the other versions. And I'd play them and flag up if there were sort of major changes. But I was busy finishing and polishing the Amiga one. And that's where I was getting into troubles. Like Sheep went in quite late, and the Banana Bomb went in quite late as well.
Iconic. I've got to ask them, because the game was a massive success. When, how did you feel when you noticed that it was breaking records and it was making it a million seller? How did it feel for you?
I can honestly say it still hasn't sunk in to this day exactly how big it got. I remember checking the video game charts on teletext when it was Digitizer, and seeing Worms was there at number 1 on the Amiga chart. And then in that trade paper that was coming into the shop each week, it had a video game shop down the road, and he got it as well. And he got this trade paper, and they had a big chart printout, and Worms was in the #1 in the all format chart. But I can honestly say in my head, though, it's still the little game I made for me and my mates. Yeah. So to hear that people in other countries have played it still blows my mind. And I think one of the funniest stories is that when we were at one of the trade shows for Worms 2 when that was launching. Right. And so obviously a lot of people coming up saying, oh, we're big fans of the game and everything. This one lad came up and he goes, can I shake your hand? He goes, I absolutely loved your game. I failed my degree because of it, but I loved your game. And it was like, oh, I didn't quite know how to respond to that. He goes, no, don't worry about it. He goes, if I went back, I'd do it all over again. I'd still fail my degree, but I still love your game. So to him, I apologise if my game got him sidetracked and everything. But no, I'm just glad that people played the game in the way it was intended, to sit down, have a laugh with you and your mates, and you could take it very seriously indeed, with like heavy strategy, or you could just have a laugh. And I'm really pleased they brought people together, because lots of people tell me stories where they'd all gather around at university or things like that, passing pads around or cramming around one Amiga keyboard. I'm just glad that people enjoyed it the way we enjoyed it, when I was making it.
Yeah, for me it's a good one-player game, but for me, Andy, it's a friends round, having a laugh, multiplayer.
No, it's always designed as a multiplayer game. The one-player game, the computers play, was more of an interesting, and that's one of the few times that A-level maths came in useful, because the Amiga versions solve a formula to work out the power and the angle and everything, and it was a really complicated formula. I was really quite proud of that. But it was always designed as multiplayer. I love Bomberman, and I'd always wanted to try and make a game that would last as long as Bomberman, because it's like you could put Bomberman on now, and I'd like, especially Bomberman 94 on the PC Engine. I think that's in my top 10 games. And you could stick Bomberman on, find a few people, and you'll have a good time. Yeah. And it's timeless. So at the back of my head was I always wanted to try and make a multiplayer game that hopefully would have as much appeal as Bomberman.
Oh, well, let's talk about some of the humour in Worms, because I love it. It doesn't take itself too seriously. It seemed to have that kind of cheeky 90s vibe, which really did. It really did. But and there's quite a few little Easter eggs and little jokes in the game, isn't there? Are you happy to share a few, Andy? Some of the sort of weirdest sort of weapons, or some of the weirdest.
Yeah, then the game's just filled with video game references, because that's my passion. So whether they're doing Street Fighter moves with the dragon punch and the fireball, even the names had to change for legal reasons. We couldn't call it a dragon punch, which I thought was a bit unfair.
Yeah.
So, but there's so you got references to that, and obviously the Street Fighter style energy bars up the top with the KO in the middle and everything. In terms of hidden things, no one actually got this, or that if they did, they didn't make much noise about it. But if you named a worm Jesus, he could walk on the water.
Wow.
Yeah, only in the Amiga versions. But so if you had Jesus on your team, you did have quite a huge advantage, because if there was a lake and you're on one side, and you just play the game, and then Jesus would walk all the way across the water and just drop a stick of dynamite on the other end and then hop his way back again. I'm trying to think of some of the other things. There's lots of little silly things, like in the old phone systems. If you wanted to know the number which you called in the old days before cell phones and everything, you dialed 1471 on the phone, and it would tell you the last number that called and read it out. So in the landscape generator, if you entered 1471, it would give you the previous level you played, which was actually quite useful, because if you found a level you liked and you want to play it again, you just dial 1471 and do it again. Worms Director's Cut is the one with all the hidden stuff, though. There's loads of hidden stuff in that.
We'll talk about it in a second. Actually, this might sort of go into it. What you said earlier, Andy, that sheep and the banana bomb came in a bit late, but what are your favourite weapons that you worked on? I assume that those two might be
in terms of all of them, my three favourites, the concrete donkey, Super Sheep, and the Holy Hand Grenade.
Yeah.
I think all three of them is a common in terms of the reaction they get from people. You cover all your bases then, because obviously the Concrete Donkey is very, very powerful and should be worshipped, of course, because it's basically a god in its own right now. And falling from the heavens, causing untold damage. Then you got Super Sheep, which was just really fun to mess around with. I don't know where I got the idea for that. I loved the sheep in the game. It was one of the best things I added to it. And then I don't know why I suddenly thought of a Super Sheep. And then the obvious thing then is make it fly. And then using just left and right to control it worked really well. And then the Holy Hand Grenade, because I grew up on repeats of Monty Python's Flying Circus.
Yeah.
And I loved Life of Brian and Holy Grail and everything. And again, it was just one of those like eureka moments. I was just sat there and thought, why haven't we got a Holy Hand Grenade? And obviously it was 3 seconds, not 2, not 4. It was 3 seconds. And but I was really happy with it, because I came up with the idea of the Hallelujah chorus before it went off. And I still think that is probably, if you had to name the single funniest moments in Worms, it's probably the Holy Hand Grenade going off.
Yeah.
And I'm still not bored of it.
Yeah. Was there any weapons or ideas that you thought about that didn't quite make it into the game, or is it?
No, it basically everything. Because it was quite an unusual development process. Because especially like Director's Cut was when I was doing that, I was actually up at Team17 most of the time, and I actually set my Amiga up in the playtest department. So, because usually you have the developers in their bit, and then the playtesters, and then you've got your management in their sections and everything. But because of the way I'd done Worms, I was surrounded with my friends, I wanted to sort of recreate that at Team17. So I had my Amiga set up in one corner of playtest. So if I had an idea, I'd stick it in the game, just hand them a disc straight away, and they start playtesting it. So literally, that's because with me there was no design documents. Worms, there was nothing. It was all scribbled on Post-it notes, and just evolved on screen over many years. So with Director's Cut, I was busy there. So literally, nearly every idea that I came up with did go in the game. I can't really think of anything that was rejected, because if something didn't work, I'd tweak it and I'd get feedback from the playtesters.
Yeah.
And it was a very sort of fluid development. It was like everything was changed and implemented quite quickly and tweaked. So no, I can't really think there's anything sort of that I scrapped really. It's that my weird brain is sort of all on there on display.
The Director's Cut is I think it's an Amiga exclusive. Is that right, Andy? I don't think. Which was it? How did that come about? Was that your idea? Was it like, I want to make my final version of this game on the Amiga? Was that kind of your love letter for the Amiga?
No, it was. Yeah, it was. That's exactly what it was. Because as I said before, I saw it as very much an Amiga game, and I was very grateful to the Amiga for making it all possible. I wanted to give the Amiga the best version I could. So originally it started as an AGA, just an update of it. And the AGA was the better graphics chipset with more colors on screen and more to choose from. So I thought I'd just do a quick AGA update to make the game look as good as it could on the Amiga.
Yeah.
But then I was on sort of fire at this point. I was on such a high from Worms coming out to hearing the stories of people playing it and everything. And I was completely in the zone at that point, and I was having all these ideas. And so Team17 were really good. They gave me complete freedom to do what I wanted with it, which, especially at this time when the Amiga market was collapsing, that was really good. That they still wanted to support the Amiga, to its dying days, through its dying days, basically. And they said I could do anything I wanted with it. So I had complete freedom. So again, it's a mixture of developing it in Bournemouth and developing it up north. And suddenly I just had all these ideas. The Holy Hand Grenade, Concrete Donkey went in it, baseball bats, the old woman, Super Cheap, obviously. And it sort of turned into basically, as you say, a love letter to the Amiga. I wanted to give the Amiga the definitive version, and also it turned into a prototype of Worms 2, because a lot of these, well, not all of them, basically all these ideas would basically end up going into Worms 2, which was in development at the time. So Carl and Dan were doing the graphics and the coding and the engine, and then I was using the Amiga as a way of basically prototyping and playtesting all these ideas, and that worked really well as well, because people could see it. I liked developing games when I was able to do it myself, because even though I see myself as more of a designer, I loved being able to. I was a sort of a designer who had to do the programming because no one else was going to make my game I wanted to play. But being able to program as well was a great way of. I had an idea, I could stick it in there, I could experiment with it, and that's when I was happiest. Was when I was busy, basically making the game on my own terms.
Good on you. And I assume that's your favourite Worms title ever released.
Yeah,
Would you say?
yeah. I think that's it's the most. I say it's my favourite because I think that's when the humour of the game and the gameplay and the humour basically they clicked. And I think in the same way as though the weapons that are introduced in Director's Cut have become mainstays of the series, to me that's when everything sort of. I know it's hard to explain, but I was in such in the zone then, and everything clicked, and I'm really proud of it. And it's. As I say, it didn't come out till '96, so no, '97 actually.
Wow.
And the Amiga market had completely collapsed by then, but Team17 went and released it, and it's got a little note in the actual manual saying, "No, this is our last Amiga game." But I wanted to say thank you to both the Amiga and the people who supported me by giving them that version, and that's the one that means the most to me anyway.
What a lovely thing to do, because obviously people would have moved on from the Amiga by then. You probably could have sold more if you made it like a PC exclusive.
Oh yeah, definitely. But as I say, it was just it was very important for me for the Amiga to have a definitive version of Worms 1. So even though it's sort of Worms 1.5 really, because Worms Director's Cut, it's sort of it's Worms 2 in the style of Worms 1. But I just wanted to give them something special. That was, because without the Amiga, I couldn't have done any of it, and it would, you've got to give something back.
What legend! And I know how much you love the Amiga. We're going to talk about that a bit later. And but you think Director's Cut? That's it. It's never going to. It's going to just remain on the Amiga. Is that fair, Andy? You're going to try and keep it that way?
Well, no, it's on. Apart from it, it's on the 500 Mini and everything. And actually, there's a hidden thing with Team17's collections on the Evercade, because you've got 2 volumes. No, I think this is right. And if you on the Evercade, if they've got 2 cartridge ports, if you put both the volumes in, then Worms Director's Cut comes up on that as well.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, and I think it's the Team17 collection, and then you've got the Worms collection. But if they're both plugged in at once, Worms Director's Cut will come up on that. So Worms Director's Cut it's turning up in various places now.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
But no, for the discerning Worms player who likes to play all the versions, they should check it out, because even though there was only 5,000 copies produced of it, because the Amiga market was so small by '97. So, but because it's on Retro Games Limited's 500 Mini now, more people have played it, and so I'm pleased it's getting a wider audience now. But it's nice that more people get to play it now.
Good on you, Andy. Yeah, respect. I've got to ask this. So you did taste huge success, and it's still a huge game for Team17 today. And it was just crazy, really, isn't it, Andy? This game is like it's become its own sort of animal in many ways. Excuse the bad pun, but you tasted huge success at a very young age, and your journey was a bit unusual. How do you reflect on that? Did it affect you, even maybe negatively, or was there any pros and cons? And was it almost too much? I know it took a long time to get the game out there, but how would you reflect on that crazy period?
Well, no, it is crazy, and it's. I wouldn't say there's really any sort of noticeable sort of downsides to it. It's just if anything, I was just living and breathing the game. And so even after it came out, I dived straight into doing director's cut, which would then become Worms 2 as well. And it's, as I say, it to me, it's still just that little game I made for me and my friends. So I think that's the reason. You know, even when someone from another country says, "Oh, no, I'm a big fan of it," still, even to this day, go, "Oh, yeah, the game's all the way over there." So it still surprises me and everything. So, and now again, it's this is hard to put into words. Sorry if I'm rambling a bit, but it's impossible to explain really. It's like, you know, this is my dream, and I'd achieved my dream and everything. So I wouldn't change anything about it. You know, I think if there'd been any downside to it or any things that I wasn't happy with, you know, you'd look back and you'd go, "Oh, I wish I'd done that differently." But no, I wouldn't do anything differently. And I appreciate Team17 they've always looked after me as well, because you hear stories, especially from around that time and earlier, where developers of games got ripped off or and things like that, and not paid royalties and things like that. And I've never had that. Team17 have always looked after me, and so no, I'd say it's to sum it up, I say it's very unusual, but I wouldn't say there's any sort of downside to it.
No. You know, I really appreciate that. I've got to ask, Andy, did you ever work on any other games, even when Worms was being released, or before or after, that you thought this could be like another whole thing I want to work on, or is it always been Worms for you?
Yeah, no, I'd say if I had to think of any sort of negatives of it, it's obviously because I was so pleased with Worms and so proud of it, and I'd been refining it for years. So like by the time it came out, it was quite refined, quite a deep game. I thought, which, you know, I thought I'd managed to sort of introduce a lot more depth to artillery games, and so I was really proud of it. So if there's any negative, it's like I did have other ideas, but they're just playing through them in my head. I kept coming up with, well, that's not as good as Worms. Well, that's not as good as Worms. Well, that's not as good as Worms. And so all these other ideas, I could see there were problems with them even before I started them. So never say never. You know, I may never say never or anything, but I was so happy with Worms that everything was then compared to it.
Yeah.
So I didn't really want to then devote more years to something if I could identify a problem from the very beginning. But I did play around with games for my own pleasure. So I did. I made a bomber worm, which is because I was you know, huge fans of Bomberman, and Bomber worm was quite interesting. So it was just a carbon copy. But if I'd had more time and it made more sense. It didn't really make sense to continue it because I wouldn't want to rip off someone else's game. But it was going to be quite fun for our own entertainment, where you could lob grenades over the blocks and things like that.
Okay, yeah.
So, and then obviously the sheep would run round and do 90-degree turns and things, and so it would have been interesting. So I don't know if anyone from Konami wants to do a Worms Bomberman mashup, then I'd be up for that. That would definitely get me back into games.
100%. Well, let's talk about some of your favourite games, Andy, if you don't mind. So I love the Amiga. I know you're a huge Amiga fan. You live and breathe the Amiga, really. But have you got like a top 5? It's a tough question, but have you got a top 5 list of your favourite ever Amiga games?
Yeah, no, I think number 1 is Hard Guns, which I don't think it really gets it like the credit is due. Really, it's like it always bugs me when I see people's or magazines or websites people's lists of the top Amiga games. It's never really that high up, or it gets left off completely. But Hard Guns, for people who aren't familiar with it, is basically science fiction Dungeon Master.
Yeah.
But 4-player split screen, so it's 4-player co-op, which was quite ahead of its time, really. And I remember when I played Phantasy Star Online for the first time with my team of 4, I thought it gave me memories of Hard Guns, all those years earlier. But the thing that impressed me most about Hard Guns was the gameplay was good, the music was stunning, the graphics were great, and the whole 4-player working together was really, really good idea. So Hard Guns number 1, number 2, the Sentinel, which was a 64 game as well. But I believe the best way to play it is on the Amiga, because it had Dave Whittaker's soundtrack, which added to the atmosphere, and obviously it was faster, and you had mouse control for selecting things. So in my opinion, the 64 was great. The 64 version was great as well, but the Amiga was my favorite way of playing the game. So the Sentinel number 2, Bubble Bobble number 3, which is just a timeless game, and it was a really good version for the time. And Lemmings number 4, again, one of those games where you just wonder, where did that come from? It's just a brilliant idea. And, as I say, I will keep raving about the graphics, as I love those animations, and that inspired me to basically try and do something similar with creatures so small in Worms. And then number 5, I can't remember that. I had to name it. So Hard Guns, the Sentinel, Bubble Bobble, Lemmings. I can only come with 4 at the moment.
That's
the 4. That's the 4 that sort of stick out.
Yeah. Why do you feel, Andy, the Amiga was so special in your humble opinion? Why, even back then in the early late 80s, and people still play it? Do you still play it today, for example? If you sort of love the machine,
and it's I think just because the Amiga's got an unusual sort of development history as well. If you read up on how it was created, it was just basically a small group in their garage. And the whole guru meditation, the error message, is because they originally developed a joy board for the Atari. And so the guru meditation, which if the Amiga crashes, that's what comes up in the red flashing letters. But to find out what was going wrong when they're making the Amiga, they used to sit on this board to balance, and it's like the Wii's balance board, but back in the 80s. So they sit on the joy board and have to balance, so they get their mind in the right zone to be able to work out what bugs they needed to fix with the Amiga. And you hear stories like this, and it just had an unusual history, and a purely creative one. It was a group of people who set out to make the best computer they could, and I think they succeeded. And I think that spills over into the software that was created for it. And Commodore didn't really know what they had, and I don't think they capitalized on what they had with the Amiga. I think the Amiga could have been so much more, and if in a different timeline the Amiga would still be going, and that would be amazing. Or at least it would have gone on a bit, even if it had lost the battle, lost the war in the end, if it had gone on for a little bit longer. But it was just, the chipset was so well designed. And if you mess around at all with programming, whether it's the demo scene or games or making games, the amount of tricks you could do, it was great. So I don't mean to go off on too many different tangents. No. It's one of my faults. My brain just goes off in different directions and everything. But one of the interesting stories about the Amiga was when in the early days of the ports of Worms, Pete at Team17 had knocked up a Jaguar version. Yeah. And this is just when the Jaguar was coming out, and which it was obviously the Jaguar was more powerful than the Amiga, and so with the port of Worms, he added 5-layer parallax to the water, because in my versions in Total Wormage there was just the Amiga had 2 layers of parallax.
Right. Yeah.
So the Amiga had 1 layer of water going on, But for the Jaguar, he had extra processing power to spare, and it was designed to do much more layers of parallax. So you had this version of Worms, a tech demo running with this 5-layer parallax water. And I looked at it and thought it looked really nice. Like you see something.
Yeah. That's pretty cool.
And it's like, that looks cool. It works. It suits the game. And I thought, I have to get that in the Amiga. And he just went, you can't do that on the Amiga.
Yeah.
And so I went back to my Amiga and I thought, no, I can't have, because this would be going in the PC version, the PlayStation version, all the other versions were going to have all this parallax water going on. And I thought, there is no way I'm having the Amiga version not having that. And so after a couple of weeks, like lots of late nights, lots of pizzas, I suddenly realized with the copper, the Amiga had a copper chip, which basically handled the drawing of the screen. Right. And with the copper chip, you could basically change colors as you go down the screen. That's why in demos and everything, you have things like the copper bars that go up and down. And most of the tricks you see on the Amiga are done with the copper. And I suddenly realized that I could, not only could you change color, but if you were clever, you could make the display jump around, so you could effectively animate. And as soon as I realized you could use the copper to animate things, I realized I could then have 5 layers of water and animate them with no processing cost at all. And it's stories like that that make the Amiga special, because at the time it felt like if you thought about something long enough and you thought out the box enough, the Amiga would offer you a way of doing it. And so I went to Chris Blythe, and Chris Blythe was one of the artists. He did the 3D animations of Worms on the little cutscenes. He was a huge Amiga fan as well. And I just went to him. I go, come and see what I've done. And I ran the latest version with the 5-layer water. He went, no way. And I said, I told you I'd do it. And it's little stories like that which makes the Amiga special to me. And the designers of that chipset were inspired, and it was so ahead of its time. And if you're a programmer, it was just fun to develop for.
Your love and admiration for the Amiga comes through so much, Andy, and I love it so much. And it changed your life a bit. Is that fair? I know it's a little bit of a cliche.
No, again, it's like the Amiga slogan. One of its other slogans was "Only the Amiga makes it possible," and it was very true for me. Without only the Amiga did make it possible, and I'll always appreciate that.
Yeah. A bit of a cheeky question, but is there any other port of Worms that you think, okay, that's a good port? Have you got a second favorite?
It's like with like Worms 2 had a really nice engine. It's like Carl was a superb coder, and Dan, who came up with the new style, the more cartoony style, they're great. No, it was a really good engine, because even at those times, smooth. Whereas the Amiga's all hardware scrolling, hardware sprites, hardware parallax. On the PC, you had to do it by hand. It was basically brute force. So to get an engine that was running in high resolution, nice and smooth, like it was really well done. I think Team 17 have always handled the game well. So I think they've always had a lot of respect for it, and I think that's come across. They've never sort of just chuck something out the door. I know the people who work on the games, and they end up living, eating, and breathing it as much as I did.
And the legacy carries on, Andy, isn't it? There's still going to be, I'm assuming there's still going to be more Worms games in the future. I know there's the 25th anniversary of Worms Armageddon. Yeah. That's quite a recent release, actually, and I'm tempted to get it for the Switch. Actually, I'm not going to lie.
Yeah. No, it's downloaded on my Switch. I love the Switch, by the way. I think that's that was just
it's a fun console, isn't it?
It's fun, and I've always identified very strongly with Nintendo. Because I think their philosophy of games as toys, I very much agree with that. And the Switch is just fun. So the 25th, the anniversary is on my Switch and everything. And I'm sure there'll be more more in the future as well.
It,
It's coming up to its 30th anniversary next year of
for
Worms 1.
Worms, yeah, that's
Yeah, and
hopefully be something. Yeah,
never in my wildest dreams did I think that, all these years on, I'd be sat here talking about it, and that people would still be playing it and still discovering it. And with the anniversary edition, we've had, been told stories where a dad would sit down with his kid to play it because he remembered playing it originally. So now he's introducing his kid to it, and his kid likes it and everything. And stories like that really sort of make me happy, and I hope that more people discover it, and long may it continue.
I've got my 12-year-old son Andy playing it with me, and he is like, "Dad, can we play some more Worms?" And it's such a fun game. It's so pick up and easy to play, and it's just so. And every level just seems to be different, and
Yeah, that is
Yeah.
very, as I say, it's very important to try and create a game that wouldn't get repetitive, and so I guess the fact that it's still going is testament to, at least that works. Just introducing all the movement and the random levels, it all came together to create something that hopefully wouldn't get boring. So I'm guessing it didn't get boring.
It's still so fun, I have to say. And look, Andy, it's been a real honor and pleasure talking to you today. I really mean that, and I appreciate your time. It's mad, and you helped change the shape of Amiga gaming and stuff and so forth. And big respects. And we just ask our guests one final question. It's a bit of a silly question, but just to finish on a bit of a high. If you could share any drinks with any video game character across any platform, any console, who would you choose and why?
I wouldn't actually go for a character. I'd go for a developer.
Oh, okay.
And it's the creator of Katamari Damacy. I think it. I can't remember his name.
Oh, I love that game, by the way.
Yeah.
We love Katamari. I've played a lot. I'm just trying to work out. I remember. Wow, I'm not surprised you love that game.
Yeah. No. Again, I'd love to. If I go for a drink with anything or anyone, but I'd go. It would just be because it's one of those games. Another game that you go, where did that come from? And it's just such an original idea.
Yeah.
And but it didn't just nail the gameplay. It nailed the whole look of it, the amazing soundtrack and everything. And I just I read a little bit about him, and so he did Katamari Damacy, then We Love Katamari, and then he went to design children's playgrounds. And I just think that's really cool because it's like he was obviously all about just creating a toy effectively. Video games in the Nintendo sort of philosophy, creating a toy to bring enjoyment, and whether he did it in video games or in a children's playground, that's obviously that was obviously the driving force behind it. But I'd love to sit down and have a drink to know just the thought process and just how you came up with that concept, because it's an amazing concept. And the series, again, it's another series that has continued. And I'm sure there'll be another Katamari Damacy game out in the future, which will be straight on my purchase list.
I'm a huge fan. Lord of the Cosmos, I think it was. Incredible character, wasn't it? That
no, just
kind of scary.
The whole thing. The game is perfect. It's like there's nothing I change about it, and it's it just brings you such a smile to your face when you play them. So if I had a drink with any character or any developer, I'd definitely choose the creator.
I've just got it's Kita Takahashi. I've got here. I believe he's the man that made it. And I'd like to join you on that drink as well, Andy, because I have to say I love those games. The Katamari games are just so fun. It oozes. It just makes you smile, like you said. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Well, and look, Andy, thank you again for your time. I really genuinely mean it.
It's been a pleasure, and I apologise if I'm not used to doing interviews and everything, so I apologise if I was sort of going off on tangents and rambling a bit. But it's been really fun, sort of reliving all this and going through it with you, and it's again, just from fact you're a fan of Worms. It's always good to speak to fans of Worms.
Thank you. And I know you don't do a lot of interviews, Andy, and I feel we're quite honoured to have you on the show. We generally mean that, and yeah, your game was always on my Amiga for the last couple of years of its life. Actually, then I spilled coffee on my Amiga, and it died, and then I had to sort of move on. So yeah, but no, Andy, you're a true legend, and thank you for your time.
I think it's very kind of you. It's yeah, as I say, keep on worming.
Thank you.